Johnny Carson dominated late-night television for 30 years. He was America's invitation face, night after night, the warm smile of the Midwesterner, the impeccable timing, the laugh, and the gift for putting any guest at ease. They thought they knew him. They thought the man at the desk was as friendly as the man they saw on television. But beneath that affable facade was another Johnny Carson hole, a one whose memory was relentless, whose vulnerabilities were deep, and whose ability to destroy or create careers was unparalleled in television history. A veteran Tonight Show producer once told a story that crossing Johnny wasn't merely a faux pas, it was a death sentence. Cross him once, and you weren't just off that evening's show. You disappeared from the kingdom altogether. Carson was from Nebraska, but in the words of one friend, he behaved like a Sicilian. He never yelled, he never made public scenes, and he seldom complained publicly about slights. Instead, he merely erased individuals from his life and his show. And since Johnny Carson was the most powerful man on television, being erased by him had repercussions that reverberated well beyond a lost booking. It could ruin a career, eliminate opportunities, and in other instances haunt individuals for the remainder of their lives. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. The most intriguing aspect of Carson's secret cruelty is that the transgressions, which might have a guest banned forever, were not necessarily spectacular. Occasionally, it was outrageous conduct, yes, but just as frequently, it was a subtle slight, a perceived betrayal, or even the feeling that someone had offended the scrupulously maintained order of The Tonight Show. Some never knew what they had done until the invitations ceased. Others realized in an instant that they had committed a cardinal sin in Carson's book. Tonight, we return to the 8 most legendary cases, 8 guests whose misbehavior, betrayals, or clash with Carson's ultimate sanction. And although Joan Rivers's very public betrayal is the most notorious of all, hers was simply the start of a trend that revealed Carson's real character, a king who never forgave. Joan Rivers's tale is perhaps the saddest of the blacklisted guests. She was not merely another comedian hoping for a big break. She was Carson's protege, his personally selected replacement as guest host, the woman he promoted when women comedians were fighting hard to be heard in a man's world. When Carson offered Joan the prized position of the first-ever permanent guest host of The Tonight Show, he was not merely bestowing credibility upon her, he wayso-inting her. Their working relationship became a real friendship. Johnny guided her, touted her ability in public, and accorded her the unusual respect many women in comedy never knew. She once swore Carson was the first influential man in television who didn't anticipate something in return for his favor. He was, in a sense, a father, which is why the happenings of 1986 were such a ruinous break. In that year, the upstart Fox network made the call to Joan with an offer she couldn't refuse. Her own late-night program, competing head-to-head against Carson's Tonight Show. The pay was astronomical, allegedly $10 million annually, but perhaps most enticingly, it was control and protection in a business already muttering its questions about Rivers' continued viability as a woman about to turn 50. NBC had made quietly certain she would not sit in Carson's seat when he retired. The Fox offer was her chance at independence. Rivers struggled with how to break it to Carson, afraid of disappointing the man she loved and admired. But before she could find the courage, Fox spilled the beans. Carson heard of her defection from her mouth? No, from Variety's front page. To a man whose existence had been haunted by emotional rejection and parental indifference, the revelation was a blow that pierced to the very center of his vulnerabilities. He blanched, mumbled, "She didn't even call me," and withdrew into himself. Joan, Rivers no longer lived in Johnny Carson's universe. The prohibition was complete. She was not to be spoken of on The Tonight Show. Footage of her guest hosting was removed from anniversary specials. Guest hosts were told to pretend as if she'd never hosted. She wrote letters, phoned, even sent packages, all of which were returned unopened. To Johnny, she was dead. The professional repercussions were swift and merciless. NBC shut the door on her, industry friends disappeared, and her career went into freefall. But Rivers herself eventually confessed the greater loss was personal. Losing the friendship of Johnny, she averred, was like losing family. She never returned to The Tonight Show again while Carson lived. Only in 2014, 9 years later, did she sit once again on that stage, now a battle-hardened survivor, yet still clearly emotional when discussing the man who had given so much and then taken it all away for good. If Rivers's betrayal hurt Carson's heart, Wayne Newton's confrontation stirred his anger. For years, Carson had playfully teased Newton in his monologues, teasing his Vegas image and oddly youthful appearance. In 1980, however, the jokes crossed over to Newton's sexual orientation, potentially career-ending suggestions at the time when such rumors could ruin a career, particularly in conservative markets. Newton's reaction wasn't a call or a complaint via an agent. He stormed into NBC's Burbank studios and marched directly into Carson's office. Witnesses remember him making a threat in so many words. "Make fun of my hair, make fun of my music, but if you ever make another joke about my sexuality, I'll kick your ass." Carson, icily reserved and a giant of a man, instructed him to leave before security was called. That was the last of Newton's Tonight Show appearances for good. Johnny could tolerate jokes made at his own expense or even bad temper from a guest, but physical intimidation went too far. Newton's exile from The Tonight Show spelled the end of his national TV visibility. He was still a Vegas attraction, but without The Tonight Show to put him in the public eye, his national profile faded. Years afterward, Newton said he had no regrets. Carson, on the other hand, just forgot him. Charles Grodin's downfall was more insidious, but no less irreversible. Grodin had been a sarcastic, wisecracking presence on the show during the 1970s and 80s, frequently appearing in a mock-aggressive persona. Initially, Carson adored the repartee, improvising magnificently and allowing the audience to relish the tension. However, eventually Grodin took the act too far, compromising the distinction between performance and reality. On one occasion, he accused Carson of phoning it in, of not caring about his guests, of just showing up for the paycheck. The words cut deeply, hitting Carson's most tender insecurity that his warmth was only a mask. He kept his smile on camera, but backstage he muttered for decisive words. "We're done with that." Grodin was never told directly. He simply stopped being booked. For Johnny, defying his control in his own domain was an unpardonable violation. Shelley Winters's fall was even more dramatic. A two-time winner of the Academy Award, she was erratic, explosive, and ever more alcohol-addicted by the 1970s. One night in 1975, clearly drunk, she prattled on nonsensically until Carson, attempting to defuse the moment, ventured a tiny jest about her being heavy, something she had previously laughed at. This time, she lost it, throwing the whole whiskey glass in Carson's face, ice and all. The crowd gasped. Johnny, soaked to the skin, managed a smile and went to commercial. Off camera, his fury was palpable. Winters was escorted off the premises, and the ban was permanent. For Winters, being bounced from The Tonight Show was disastrous. In an industry already cold to her, Carson's exile shut down her final avenue to the mainstream public. Years later, she conceded he had been correct in never forgiving her. Rich Little's vanishing was a more subdued enigma. The master impressionist was a Tonight Show regular, popular with viewers, and a repeat guest dozens of times. And then he was simply gone. No controversy, no scandal, just nothing. Only years later did insiders confirm the reality. Carson had become annoyed at Little's perpetual impressions, both in front of and behind the camera. What the audiences adored for 10 minutes, Johnny tolerated for hours. Worse, Carson caught Little recycling stale material, a cardinal offense in Johnny's opinion. Carson was proud of being fresh. Telling jokes that had been done before was lazy, an affront to his standards. He never told Little. He just ceased to call. Little reported afterward that he wished someone had told him. He would have brought new stuff if he'd known. But with Johnny, the door closed softly and forever. Truman Capote's exile was tragic, By the mid-1970s, the great writer was downed in booze and drugs. When he came on Carson's program in 1975, he staggered, slurred, and mumbled through incomprehensible anecdotes. Carson attempted every ploy to salvage him, brief questions, comedy direction, but they failed. The point of breakdown arrived when Capote wandered into graphic realms not acceptable for broadcast. Carson went to commercial, then softly informed him the look was finished. It was humiliating and definitive. For Carson, inebriated guests were an affront to his audience. Capote was never invited again. Losing that platform, added to his private decline, solidified his downward trajectory. For Johnny, it wasn't judgment. It was a matter of safeguarding the integrity of a show. The Smothers Brothers embodied a different type of offense, politics. Tom and Dick Smothers were great satirists, counterculture heroes, and thorns in the establishment side. Carson admired their skill but detested surprises, and in 1970 Tom took his Tonight Showtime to give an anti-war address. Johnny smiled nicely but was fuming. Later, he proclaimed them too much trouble. They weren't technically forbidden, but the invitations trickled down to few, and when they did come, were issued in stern conditions, no politics. For the Smothers Brothers, who felt comedy was political, this was censorship. To Carson, it was guarding his show as a refuge of entertainment, not activism. Ultimately, Morton Downey Jr. sealed his own doom with anarchy. The brash, aggressive host embodied the arrival of shock TV, yelling at guests, puffing smoke in their faces, provoking audiences. Carson grudgingly booked him in 1988 out of a sense of obligation to recognize the phenomenon. It was a mistake. Downey flouted procedure, sauntered around, played for the crowd, cut into Carson, and ridiculed other hosts, including by implication Johnny himself. Carson, the consummate professional, cut the segment short. Behind the scenes, he wrote off Downey's routine as a circus, not TV. Downey was never asked back, his style completely incompatible with all Carson represented. All of these 8 tales expose a side of Johnny Carson's private personality. He was charming, to be sure, but ruthless as well. He could pardon much, accept betrayal, accept disrespect, accept intoxication, accept intimidation, accept laziness, and accept politics that upset his finely honed retreat from the world's troubles. To offend Johnny Carson was to be exiled from late night's most influential stage, sometimes for decades, sometimes for eternity. And as the public perceived only the warm grin, behind it existed a man who never forgot and never forgave.